first time. I mean, table tennis, sadly, is not a big sport in the UK. There are 30,000 paid-up members of the English governing body. They pay a subscription to the English Table Tennis Association, and about 1.5 million recreational players. So it's not terribly small either. But when I became number one, a majority of the top players in the country at that time weren't just from the same town as me, or the same suburb, but from the same street. Silverdale Road in Reading, which, has to be said, is a rather anonymous street. My parents still live there. But I knew enough about science, even back then as a teenager, to realise that there hadn't been a genetic mutation that had hit Silverdale Road and eluded the surrounding streets and villages. In other words, the explanation was not about innate talent. Top tennis players are not looking at the ball. The eye tracking monitors reveal that top tennis players are looking at the upper body of an opponent, what's sometimes called the postural orientation. And depending on how that looks, how the waist relates to the shoulders, the torso, and the elbow, they are able to make an inference about where the ball is going 100 milliseconds before it's been struck. And the motion sensors are picking expert tennis players moving towards the future path of the ball 1/10 of a second early. So I said, righto, replay the tape, and I'll look at the postural orientation of my opponent. So Professor Williams replayed the tape, and I looked intently, but it didn't help me. For the simple reason that there are innumerable different postural orientations, subtly different ways that the elbow relates to the waist, and so on and so forth. What is it about Djokovic, Nadal, Federer, the Williams sisters, Navratilova, that enables them to look at a dynamic, complex, rapidly changing visual environment and make an efficient judgment on where they need to go to return the ball? Well, it has nothing to do with innate reactions, as you've probably picked up on by now. If you test Formula One drivers or tennis players or table tennis players on a neutral test of reactions, a red light going on and you have to press a button as fast as possible, they are no faster on average than the average person in this room. In the same way that chess players do not have superior memories to the average person in this room. It has nothing to do with what is sometimes also described by commentators as the skill of top sports people. It's nothing to do with better eyesight, whether in terms of stereoscopic depth or peripheral vision. They're on average no better than the average person in this room. What it has to do with is year upon year of dedicated, self-motivated, high-quality practice that equips expert tennis players with what's called a perceptual cognitive repertoire that enables them to look at complexity and make efficient judgments. And I would argue, the reason I'm using this as a metaphor, this explanation is almost identical in all sorts of different fields characterized by complexity, and I'll define complexity in a minute. But if you take, for example, a doctor looking at an X-ray or a radiogram and able to see structure and meaning that is completely invisible to us, nothing to do with their eyesight, all to do with years of diagnostic training. Or a firefighter that looks at a burning building and is able to immediately discern how to deploy his or her men or women. To us, we're just looking at the colour and the height of the flames. Almost always, when you deconstruct the processes which are going into expert performance, our natural inclination to postulate that it's to do with talent, something that they've inherited and which has propelled them to where they needed to go, turns out to be flawed. Virtually any high-level performer, if you talk about how they got there, that is a story of transformation, because everyone starts off mediocre. With children, imagery and animation is very effective. Pictures of the brain changing over time. That goes very deep with young people. The problem at the moment is if a young person sees somebody in their maths class doing something very well, they think, gosh, I can't do what they do. They've got a language and ability that I lack. What we need them to be thinking is the same as what they think when they see somebody with big muscles. If they see somebody looking like Arnold Schwarzenegger, they think, oh gosh, they've been working out in the gym, because you can observably verify how muscles change in size and composition with hard work. What we need young people to say when they see someone doing something well at maths is, oh, they've been working hard in the maths gym. And if I want to get what, in other words, in maths classroom and maths homework, if I want to get what they've got, I have to work hard so I can change my brain. Thinking of the brain as a muscle that grows with use. That's one thing. The other thing is the words we use when we interact with each other. And I'll highlight that with an experiment conducted by Professor Drake, who I mentioned a few moments ago. She took a group of young people and gave them a task, a test, at the end of which she praised half of them for their talent with the words, "Wow, you must be really smart," and the other half for their effort with the words, "Wow, you must be really hard-working." She then gave them a choice of whether to do a hard or an easy test. Those praised for their talent overwhelmingly chose the easy test. They feared taking on a tough challenge, potentially failing at it and losing the talent label. Interestingly, the fixed mindset predicts risk aversity. Those praised for their effort, on the other hand, overwhelmingly chose the hard test. They wanted to prove just how hard-working they were. Then they were given a test of identical difficulty to the opening test. Those praised for talent deteriorated in their score by 20%. Those praised for effort improved their score by 30%. My first daughter was born 6 months ago today, and I can imagine in a couple of years' time she draws a picture, and I'm going to say, "Oh, wow, are you the next Picasso or what?" It's easy to do, but of course, the subliminal inference she's getting from that talent-based praise is either, "Gosh, I'd better not try painting anything too difficult, or they're going to see I'm no Picasso," or she's going to draw something that isn't going to be quite so good, and it's not quite as good that one. And her entire self-image is going to be destroyed, because it's all based on the idea of her talent. Whereas if you say, "That's fantastic, you worked really hard," or, "I love the way those colours go together, I love the way you composed it in a particular way," she's going to think, "Well, if I want to do something even better, I have to work even harder."